How do you choose the right school for your child or for your children? How do you ensure safety of your children in the school? How do you figure out the back and forth and getting admission for your child in the school? Does the education transfer back and forth? I'm going to cover all these things in this video. Sabko Namaste, Jessica here, back with another episode of the Invisible India podcast. This is episode 78, Approaching the Educational System in India. As you know, I have 2 children, and we have been navigating the educational system here. And this episode is a response to many listeners who have actually asked me, how do you approach the educational system in India as a foreigner? Many of these people are NRIs who are considering moving back to India. People who are just confused and saying, hey, I want to move back to India, but I'm just not sure about the schooling and the education. So if that's you, this episode is for you. And the whole audio episode is available on my website and wherever podcasts are found. And it's a much longer episode. So how do you choose a school in India? First of all, there are several different boards that you have to be aware of. The most common are CBSC, IB, state boards, and Cambridge. There are also several other boards as well. The most common one you're going to hear is CBSC. This is for private schools, anywhere that you want to put your child. Most people in India, if you have a cent to your name, you put your child in a private school. Government schools are what we would call public school in the United States is not equivalent to what a government school would be in India. It's a very different kind of system. A government school in India is basically if you don't have money to send your child to a private school, people put their child in a government school. So sometimes the teachers are known to just not show up in government schools, and just the quality is questionable. I think most people, anyone that has a cent to their name, before you buy yourself a nice Saudi or nice new gold set, or even before you buy a car or a new scooter, you're going to put your child in private school. That's just how people prioritize here. Typically, a lot of the folks here are really interested to put their kid in a convent school, which is basically, sometimes these schools were started by the British or by some kind of mission group where there is still like a very strict kind of nun figure in place doing the education. They're known to be really solid English medium schools. However, what I found with convent schools is that they are very much like in demand. So everyone wants to put their kid there, and it is very much, rote memorization and large class sizes. Everyone wants to get in, and it's a huge system. You have to accommodate to them. Also, some of them, from my experiences, are not as up to date with technology. And so if you are going to have your child be absent, you actually have to go in person and submit an application and say, my child is going to be absent tomorrow. I mean, what year are we living in? If one of you is a stay-at-home parent, or if you have somebody like a grandparent that can go to the school, show up personally all the time, convent might be for you. But if you're busy, if you're working, and if you don't have a lot of margin to kind of deal with the politics of a large convent school, I would say move to the next option. Other options would be other private schools that are more Montessori based. And so some have said that yes, the Montessori system, they use that word, but it doesn't actually mean the same thing that it would originally intend. It basically just says this is more of a child-focused environment. However, if they are still associated with one of the main boards, like a CBSC, typically, they have the same standards, the same exams that every other CBSC school has. So the children have to meet those standards. So they're pushing the kids quite a bit to meet those standards and to complete the exams. In the full audio version, I give several questions that you should ask if you go to a school and listen for an interview. But this is just a short version for YouTube. And then, of course, there are international board is still quite a competitive and rigorous environment. There are many good schools across India that have what's called an international board, and it's basically preparing your kids to go abroad. And so some of these schools actually use a different curriculum entirely. They use an American curriculum, a British curriculum. And so figuring out what are the actual international schools can be a little bit tricky. You have to really get to know the city where you're going to be living and find out what are the actual international schools and what board do they use. A lot of schools will write international school. That doesn't mean that it's actually an international school that has staff that are trained in other methodology. Let's talk about safety. Safety in schools is definitely something that I worried about a lot before putting my kids in. Let me think. My daughter has been to 4 different schools, and if you count homeschooling, and my son has been to 5, if you count homeschooling. That's excessive amount of schools, I realize, and we've been through the ringer on this for sure. We did experience corporal punishment in one of the schools, and that was definitely 2 of the schools actually, and that was definitely an issue for us, given that we don't want our children to be hit or shamed in school. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that I feel is, even if a child is not being hit, are they being emotionally damaged, I guess, or embarrassed in front of other people? And this just depends on your values as a family. Some people motivate their kids via shame. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. And I think that's kind of how the whole Indian society works, is honor and shame, motivating through what are other people going to say and what are other people going to think. If that's the way everyone operates, it's fine. I come from a innocence guilt culture. We don't use shame as a method of motivation. So I find the shame-based motivation to be really harmful for my kids. And maybe you do too if you've lived in the West and are considering that move to India. It's one of those things where if you're not there with your child, you can't control the outcomes of what happens in the class. And sometimes children would be asked to stand in front of the class and recite something, and if they don't know it, if they didn't do it perfectly well, they might be punished, or they might be shamed, or if they're talking in class or doing something wrong, they might get a little whack. That is common, and that does happen, and it's happened to our son for sure. You have to know your child. Would your child be able to function in that kind of an environment? How would your child do being in front of a group, and are they very sensitive or are they very compliant? Those are all things you got to think about. Other than that, safety, is it safe to send your child by public transit? Do you want to drop them off yourself? How long is your child going to be sitting in a van or in a bus? If you're in a large city, is there a lot of pollution? Will your child just be sitting in a van for an hour on the way? That was a consideration for us as well. And as far as just the way that other children behave, of course, any school you have to look at that. What are the children around your child behaving like, and how are they influencing? Unsafe playgrounds are also another issue that I think come up a lot of times. So just going and looking at the playground yourself and teaching your child a little bit how to play on metal equipment is really important. And having a conversation with the staff before you enroll your child, and making sure that they watch your kid carefully, so that the kid doesn't get scratched or hurt on the playground equipment. Third and last thing I'm going to talk about just on this YouTube video is the education transferable between East and West. And this is a tricky one. I would say if your child is under the age of 10, I would say that you could probably go either back and forth and you could figure out the adjustment. If your child is above 10 years old, and if you're considering moving from a different country to India and putting your child in an all Indian school, I would really hesitate to make that decision unless your child is really academic. In Western countries, a lot of time the education is very creative. There's a lot of autonomy given to the kid. It's not a lot of memorization. And in Indian schools, in general, there's a lot of memorization, a lot of homework, a lot of writing. If your kid is good at that, they might do fine. But transferring them from a Western country where they didn't have to do that to India is going to be a very hard transition. Transferring a child from India to a culture or a school system where there is more creative kind of thing is also going to be hard, but it's a much easier transition. I've seen it so many times. if the child's already excelling in like the hard sciences and in writing and stuff, those are all transferable skills. They just have to learn new skills of creative writing and those kind of things, which can be taught easily. You can't teach a child how to do large chunks of memorization once their brain has already been wired a different way. It's just very tough. So I would say that if your kid, like I said, is above 10, I would be very leery to just dump them into an Indian school from another thing. If they're under 10, I think they can probably figure it out and adjust. So that's all that I'm going to cover on this YouTube video. If you want to hear the full episode, please go ahead and go to my website, InvisibleIndiaPodcast.com. You can also go and check out my new course. It's called Overcoming Hindi Pronunciation Pitfalls. It's also on my site, or you can go to learnhindianywhere.com. Make sure and sign up for my newsletter. I do have a lot of little treats which I give out in the newsletter, discounts and whatnot. That's on my homepage, InvisibleIndiaPodcast.com. You can sign up for it there. Again, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcatcher, whether that's here on YouTube for the short versions or for the full versions on iTunes, Spotify, Ghana, JioSaavn, wherever you may listen to podcasts. Okay, that's all for now.